God of War Ragnarok is a walking simulator. All you ever do in this game is walk and talk with your friends, watch cutscenes aplenty, and interact with hidden loading screens all over the place. Wait, did I just call this thing a game? No, what's wrong with me? You can't even consider this a game, let alone a sequel. It's just DLC for the 2018 game. And despite this game, DLC being a walking simulator, it's also extremely unfair and deeply flawed. Enemies in this game, DLC, have levels attached to them, and if they are just one level above you, it's impossible to defeat them. There is no way on earth that you can beat an enemy in this stupid DLC if they are just one level above your own level. And don't even get me started if they are 2 or 3 levels above you. It's not like there is a lot of gameplay videos in this platform proving that you can beat this entire game, DLC, while being underleveled by using strategy and being a skillful and resourceful player. No! None of that is possible in this game. There is no player agency, no player expression, no player whatever. The game is just unfair and arbitrary. Poorly designed. I don't know, man, can you even believe the nerve on these game developers? They want me to pick my PlayStation controller and use the right analog stick on it to control the camera in-game. Outrageous! How can they expect such a thing from me as the player? It's not like giving the player the ability to manage the camera angle in video games is something that has been done for the past 2 decades or so. This is just arbitrary and cheesy poor game design that makes the game, DLC, unnecessarily more difficult. It sucks and I'm not entertained. The level design, puzzles, traversal sections and boat sections, they all suck. They are terrible, they are boring, and they are fake gameplay. NPCs are always ruining the experience. They always give away the solution to all your problems. It's like the game developers don't have any faith in you as the player. It's almost insulting that they have to have an NPC telling you what to do in every puzzle, even if this isn't a puzzle game and you shouldn't care that much about that stuff to begin with. Furthermore, the level design is just a bunch of corridors and arenas connected to one another. The climbing and traversal sections, you can't miss the button prompts in order to make Kratos smack his face into a wall, so they suck. Just bullshit out of platforming and fake gameplay. The boat sections and new brand sled sections? Glorified loading screens. Exploration in video games is just a lie that modern video game developers are trying to drill into your skull. There is no such thing as exploration, just hidden loading screens that waste your time non-stop. It's not like games can present to you diverse scenarios and level design with different opportunities and a large scale of discovery that you can approach at your own discretion and pace. No! It's just loading screens because, I don't know, the game is poorly designed and it needs to load. Bad game. The combat? Disappointing. You don't start right away with the 20 different skills on every weapon that you unlocked throughout the entirety of the previous game. It doesn't matter if there are many logical reasons as to why you don't start with all that stuff from the beginning of this game. I don't care. The game doesn't overwhelm me with new mechanics and stuff that takes time to learn, so it sucks! Wait, did I say game? I mean DLC! Speaking about the combat, let's talk about the hard mode and how bullshit and unfair it is. After countless hours of playing the game on hard mode and dying non-stop due to how poorly balanced the higher difficulties are in this game, DLC, I finally figured out what the hard mode really does. It gives a super armor to all enemies in the game, even the basic ones. So that means that all enemies can now dodge or block during your attacks? What a fucking horrible idea! What were they thinking when they made this hard mode? How come enemies in an action game don't just stay put like training dummies and let me kill them for free without putting any kind of thought into the way I play, and don't let me win by just mashing the buttons on my controller? This is ridiculous. This is just bare bones bad game design, cheap and balanced difficulty, and a waste of my time. By the way, in this game you play as the boy, because it is more obvious than ever that they want to make the boy's game. And his gameplay segments are the worst. They are completely fucking brain dead. The game basically becomes a third-person shooter where you charge up magical arrows and then charge up normal arrows, and that's it. Also, this game is woke because it has women and black people in it. If you like this game, you are woke beyond salvation. And ultimately, this game is in Elden Ring, so it sucks, because every game released after February of the year 2022 should be like Elden Ring, or else it can't be considered a good game. Alright, and that should be enough capping for now. Okay, hello everyone, this is Mabel HQ, the pro gamer, and I'm back with another God of War video for you guys. So basically what you just saw is a big part of the criticism that God of War Ragnarok has been getting since its release around 8 months ago. And god dude, that shit is hilarious. I had to put it in there because it was too much of a good opportunity to remember the cringe and the lols that I got out of those videos from those people hating on this game while pretending they are making an objective critique. So seeing how there is all this misinformation around this game being spread by a bunch of DSP clones pretending to be game journalists that just play the game on the lower difficulty levels, rushing their playthroughs as much as they could and without putting any actual effort into learning a game as complex and deep as this one, so they could get these regurgitations of a review out as fast as they could in order to get more views on YouTube, I said, why not try my hand at it as well? I consider myself pretty good at this game.
Pretty good.
Pretty good.
I have been playing it on the hardest difficulty since day one, and I currently have around 150 to 200 hours of playtime on it. So you could say I have plenty of experience in God of War Ragnarok, so I should be more than qualified to actually offer a proper review of this game, so hey, let's check it out, shall we? So first thing I wanna talk about is the difficulty levels. On God of War Ragnarok we have the same difficulty levels that were present in God of War 2018, those being Gimme a Story, Gimme Balance, Gimme a Challenge, and Gimme God of War. Well, actually, this time around the Give Me a Challenge difficulty is now called Gimme No Mercy, which basically is the hard mode difficulty level for this game. And there is a new brand difficulty called Gimme Grace, which is like a middle point between normal and easy that in all honesty seems pointless to me. I think the two difficulty levels below balance, that is basically normal mode, don't really need to exist at all. I think this game is accessible enough and possible to beat by pretty much everyone, as long as you play a semi-linear, semi-open world game such as this one as it should be played, which means doing all the optional content before progressing with the campaign. Which is something that the game actually tells you and reminds you of very frequently. Like every time you go through a loading screen, there's gonna be a tutorial telling you, hey brah, are you heading to the main objective of the level right now? Well, there is this optional quest in the complete opposite direction that you should probably go and do first. Or you're gonna have the characters constantly telling you stuff like, hey dude, we actually have to go over there to complete the level, but maybe we should go and explore some more of the optional zones for a while so we don't get our asses kicked later? Stuff like that. And as long as you do what the game is telling you to do, nobody should have a single issue completing this game on Gimme Balance difficulty. So yeah, I don't see what's the point of the other two difficulty levels below normal. They seem like an actual waste of resources to me. Another thing that I would like to note is that this game is much harder than God of War 2018 on the higher difficulty levels. If it is your first time playing this game and you want to start right away with the hardest difficulty, don't. Just don't, dude. Play it first on Give Me No Mercy. The Give Me God of War difficulty in this game is completely brutal and ruthless. And there is a lot of new stuff and changes that you need to get used to in this game in comparison with God of War 2018. To put it in perspective, the first Berserker on New Game Plus in this game is already as hard or harder to defeat than the Valkyrie Queen in God of War 2018, but we will talk more about that later. So that on top of the unforgiving difficulty might make your first experience with the game a very frustrating one. Okay, so having talked about the difficulty somewhat briefly, let's now talk a little about some quality of life improvements and new mechanics that we can start noticing from the very beginning of the game. Alright, for starters, this is actually a very minor thing, kind of a small remark on my part, you could even call it a nitpick, but regardless, it's something worth mentioning in my opinion. As soon as you take control of Kratos, our main character, you are able to sprint right away. This is actually something that they locked you off of in God of War 2018, until you ran into the first mini-boss of the game, which made the first 15 to 20 minutes of the game feel very awkward, because in those first 15 or 20 minutes you also had to go through 4 or 5 different combat encounters, and not being able to sprint, which is a core mechanic in these games, made those first combat encounters feel very sluggish and dull. But that isn't the case anymore in God of War Ragnarok, which is a subtle but very welcome improvement. Another improvement that I noticed is that in Ragnarok you can start upgrading the movesets of your weapons very early on. Like a few 10 or 15 minutes into the game and you are already gaining experience and purchasing new skills for your weapons. In God of War 2018 you were not able to buy new skills until a little before you met Brock the blacksmith, and after having defeated the first 2 bosses, which is like 1 hour and a half into the game. Not to mention that your starting moveset in 2018 was more limited in comparison to Ragnarok. So I would say this is something that makes the starting 1 or 2 hours of the game much more engaging. Something else that is worth mentioning is that you have access to the Blades of Chaos in Ragnarok very early on too, like 1 hour into the game and you are already swinging your fire machetes and burning assholes into ashes. Now compare that to 2018, where you actually got a grip of the blades only by being halfway through the game, like 20 hours in. So right off the bat you also have much more variety thrown into the gameplay in Ragnarok. I should mention too that the blades in this game have been heavily nerfed, but despite being nerfed so much, they are still the best weapon in the game. I don't know, man, it's kinda funny. In 2018 you had this move on the blades where you aim at an enemy or a surface and then you hold the light attack button to impale a said enemy or surface with the blades and cast a fire explosion. This move was absolutely fucking busted. It would send almost any light enemy into the air and open them up for long combos, or you could just keep spamming the explosion and they would be stun locked to death. And it had such a good range that it didn't matter if you were fighting a horde of enemies at the same time, the explosion would keep all of them in check, and it could even stun lock some of the heavy enemies like trolls and ogres. In God of War Ragnarok this is not a thing anymore. You still have the fire explosion that sends enemies into the air, but it's much more slower and it doesn't have nearly as much stun lock potential as it did in 2018. So it's not as abusable as it used to be. And I think that's a good change. Better balance throughout moves and weapons is always a good thing. Alright, let's move now on to some of the new stuff, shall we? We are quickly introduced at the beginning to one of the new brand mechanics in the game called Weapon Signature Move. And oh boy, I like this mechanic so much. This thing goes so deep and makes the combat so much better. Basically, whenever you are using the axe or the blades, you can either hold or mash whatever button you have designated for this action, in my case that being triangle, and you can charge up a super ice or fire attack, depending on which weapon you have equipped. And this mechanic is constantly evolving throughout the game to the point where no matter your playstyle or what kind of situation you see yourself in, there's always gonna be a way in which you are gonna be able to apply this mechanic into the combat. For example, you see some enemies coming your way from afar into the horizon. Fortify your axe throws with the signature move skill and blow them into oblivion. There are enemies rushing you at high speed and you need to stop them on their tracks. Charge up your signature skill with the blades and smack them into the ground with a powerful guillotine strike. There are enemies with shields that need to have their guards crashed. Quickly start a sprint for an early signature skill activation with the axe and use the heavy version of the skill to destroy their defenses. It's just such a cool mechanic and it has so many uses. It's a very welcome addition to the game. Another of my favorite new mechanics are Extinguish Flames and Vaporize Frost. These are two skills that you can buy for the axe and the blades, and basically what they do is that whenever you inflict an enemy with the elemental effect of one of your weapons, you can swap to the weapon of the opposite element and deal increased damage to your enemies for a period of time. So let's say that you burn an enemy with the Blades of Chaos, you then can swap to the Leviathan Axe and hit the burning enemy and you'll do more damage to them, like a lot more. It's a considerable increase, like 30 or 40% more damage for like 8 or 9 seconds. It's a really good mechanic that encourages strategy and experimentation with your weapons, another fine addition to the game. Another mechanic that I think would be worth mentioning is the glacial permafrost and furious immolation. These are two other skills that you can buy for the axe and the blades, and they are basically the blessing of the frost and gift of Apollo runic spells that enhance your melee attacks in God of War 2018. So these two spells are now a permanent piece of your arsenal, and you can activate them after filling up a meter that builds up by hitting enemies quickly without getting hit yourself. So basically it's a mechanic that rewards the player for getting good and fighting efficiently. Nice. These are only 3 of my favorite new mechanics in the game, and there are plenty more that we will be talking about more in detail later, like the blue enemy attacks, the skill mod tokens, the shield customization, the 3 different Spartan Rage modes, the new arrow types, and the spear. But remember guys, God of War Ragnarok is just a DLC for God of War 2018. Okay, now let's talk a little about the new enemies and the level design. Let's start with the level design, by the way. So basically the level design in this game is the same as in 2018, but amplified by a tenfold. In God of War 2018 you had the Lake of the Nine area in Midgard that was like a semi-open world location that you could go to and explore freely at your own pace and gather resources and equipment to make Kratos stronger, and pretty much any other area was just a location designated to do a main or optional quest that were linear for the most part. In God of War Ragnarok there are around 6 or 7 locations that function like the Lake of the Nine area from the 2018, and dude, it's so fucking cool. There are like 10 secret boss fights in each one of these locations, plenty of combat encounters that will keep you busy for a while, and all sorts of hidden items and equipment that you can get to make your Kratos stronger. Exploring all of these areas for the first time was a blast for me personally, and there is not really much else to say. I think the art direction in every level is outstanding, they all look beautiful and go in hand with the vibe of the game, the lore and the story that the game aims to tell you. One more thing that I would like to note about the level design, although I'm not sure if this actually falls into level design, is the enemy scaling in every area, whether main or optional. God of War 2018 side quests and optional areas had kind of a weird feeling to them, because every time that you found one of them, you would go and explore them only to find that you were severely under leveled and you would struggle big time in order to clear them. So basically what you had to do in God of War 2018 was to clear the campaign levels first before actually going into the optional areas to have a better chance of winning. And I say that this is weird and not bad, because usually in this kind of games it works the opposite way. You are given access to the optional areas and side quests in order to grow stronger and have a better chance of beating the main quests and levels. But I also find this kind of level scaling to be cool on its own way, because it presents the player with a challenge that they need to prepare for accordingly in order to beat it. So it encourages the player to experiment with the RPG mechanics, and I think that's something good. But anyways, that's the way it worked in God of War 2018, but it isn't like that anymore in God of War Ragnarok. In Ragnarok, anytime you are given access to an optional area or side quest, the game does so under the premise of you being prepared for that area or side quest, and you can feel right away that the optional areas feel way more balanced for the moment you first gain access to them. And on the other hand, the campaign levels feel very unforgiving and brutal if you play on the harder difficulties and you don't do any side quests or optional exploring. Okay, I think it's time we talk about the new enemies and the RPG system. So first of all, let's address a criticism that I have seen made quite often about the enemies in this game. Are the enemies unfair because of the RPG system? Are they annoying? Are they not fun to fight? Well, in order to answer these questions, we need to remember that God of War by default is a franchise meant to be challenging and difficult. The old God of War games were like this, and it isn't any different for the modern ones. No matter how much time passes, God of War still retains its reputation for being a hardcore franchise, and it will most likely continue to do so in the future. So with that said, making a difficult game is well, difficult. There is a very thin line between something being challenging and being unfair or frustrating. And pretty often, things that are challenging end up feeling frustrating too. And that's exactly the case with God of War. Or, well, at least the modern ones. I do think the old God of War games make some questionable decisions when it comes to difficulty. I'm looking at you, God of War 3. But I digress. God of War 2018 was a game that aimed to be challenging to the point where every enemy was intended to give you a headache until you figure them out. The combat in that game was tough because every enemy had a unique characteristic that was meant to present a problem that you had to figure out. For example, draggers can power up and cover themselves in a lava armor that explodes if you attack them. You deal with that by implementing backdash attacks in your combos. You have the seals that counter-attack with a poison secretion if you go too ham on them. So you deal with that by air juggling them first with a heavy or special attack before going for long combos. And it's the same story with the new enemies in God of War Ragnarok. Hell, on my first playthrough and for half of the second one, I fucking hated wyverns, dude. I dreaded every time that I knew I was going to fight one of these fuckers. I would always try to parry that grab that they do when they glide towards you, and would always mess up the timing for the parry and get hit by it. Or when they go into the air and start charging up that Bifrost blast of theirs, I would always try to snipe them out of the air with an axe throw, only to end up missing and getting hit by the blast every time. These enemies pissed me off so much, and I would always get so salty when fighting one of them. But then I learned that it's a lot easier to just roll away from their glide grab, and you can just block the Bifrost blast and you can get relatively unscathed out of it. And those two things alone made these enemies so much more tolerable for me. In the end, I just needed to get good and figure the enemy out. And it's the same for pretty much every enemy in the game. These enemies are meant to be troublesome, but there is always a way to deal with them. And let's not forget that on top of all this, there are also RPG mechanics at play here. So this also adds another layer of difficulty to the enemies. What are these RPG mechanics, you might ask? Well, basically, enemies in this game have levels, and depending on your own level and the level of the enemy, your ability to stagger them, to parry or block their attacks, and the damage they deal and can take from you will vary. For example, an enemy that is below your level can be identified by a light green health bar. This means that as long as it is not a mini-boss type enemy, all your attacks will be able to stagger them and they can't guard crash you. They will also do reduced damage and will take more damage from you. Then you have enemies with a dark green health bar that indicates that they are on the same level as you. Your light attacks occasionally will not be able to stagger this type of enemies, but they can still be staggered by your heavy attacks and skills, and they can have attacks that can guard crash you. Then we have enemies with orange health bars. That means they are one level above you, and they are now fully invulnerable to being staggered by your light attacks, and occasionally some of your heavy attacks won't be able to stagger them either, but they will always still be staggered by your skills. After these, there are the purple health bar enemies, which are now 2 levels above you. And this is when things start getting spicier, because these enemies are fully invulnerable to being staggered by your light or heavy attacks, although they can still be staggered by your skills. Some of their attacks that you would normally be able to block will now guard crash you if you don't parry them, and they also take reduced damage from your attacks, so you gotta start being more careful around enemies with this type of health bars. And finally, we have the red health bar enemies, which are 3 or more levels ahead of you. These guys are fully immune to being staggered by your attacks, either light or heavy or skills. Attacks that you would be able to parry are now unblockable, so you have to dodge no matter what, and these enemies will most of the time one-shot you. But it is very unlikely that you will ever run into a red health bar enemy in this game. If you do, it's because you are doing something terribly wrong, or you are purposely not improving your equipment, so the game becomes harder. But yeah, that's That's basically what the enemies and the RPG system in this game are about. So does all of this make the game unfair? Are the enemies unbalanced because of the RPG mechanics? Do they have too much super armor? Well, simply put, the answer is no. All of that is just nonsense, bro. Plain and simple. The only instance where the game would feel remotely unfair and whatnot would be when fighting the red health bar enemies that are 3 or more levels ahead of you. But like I said, you have to be trying really freaking hard at playing the game in the wrong way to actually run into a red health bar enemy. And even then, the learning curve and skill ceiling in this game is so high that a skilled player can easily beat 4 or 5 red health bar enemies at the same time. Other than that, the enemy variety has been improved by a long shot. I always thought that the enemy variety in God of War 2018 was alright, but there were some people that were not happy with it. Now there is like a double the enemy factions, and every enemy faction has like 6 or 7 different enemy versions, including mini-bosses. It's great. Actually, the enemy variety is so big now that some enemies like the seals from the previous game feel somewhat underused. In Ragnarok you only fight these guys like 4 times in the entire game, and it's kind of a shame for me personally, because I really liked fighting these dudes in the 2018 game. We can also find that pretty much all enemies from the previous game have gone through some changes in them. Like for example the travelers that got buffed and they now pull off all sorts of nasty stuff on you. Or the draggers that we discussed earlier, who were nerfed and don't use their lava armor as often anymore and aren't as threatening as they used to be, which, considering all the improvements that the combat system and your characters have been granted in this game, it feels kinda necessary, but it's alright. Less things for DSP clones game journals to complain about, I guess. One major improvement that this game presents in comparison to God of War 2018 is the boss fights. 2018 only had 4 main boss fights, which were Boulder, the Giant Dragon, Magni and Modi, and Boulder. Boulder. And the Valkyries and the Trolls. Way too many trolls to be precise. The Valkyries and Magni and Modi were great, but the Dragon sucked ass. Both Boulder fights were pretty much the same, with the second one just applying some minor changes to his moveset, although they were still pretty good. And the Trolls that were also fun to fight, but they were just too recurrent of a mini-boss during the entire campaign, and suffered the same issue as Boulder. In God of War Ragnarok though, the game is around 60 to 70 hours long if you played it on the harder difficulty levels, and just in the first 10 hours you have fought more bosses than in the entirety of God of War 2018. The game has an insane amount of bosses, and most of them are great, save for some exceptions.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
But we're gonna talk about those later. Alright, so far we have talked about the positive aspects of Ragnarok and the many improvements that it brings to the new formula of God of War. So I think it's time we move on to talking about the more controversial side of the game. I bet many can guess where the video is headed right now. That's right, guys. It's time to talk about the Atreus'S sections. Okay, so simply put, in this game we also get to play as the boy, and whether taking the protagonism in the franchise away from Kratos is a bad thing or not, has been a topic of discussion since the release of Ragnarok. And while some people hate it, others love it. I personally enjoy the sections with Atreus, and I don't mind playing them on subsequent playthroughs, but I can totally understand why others might dislike them or would rather keep playing as Kratos. So I think the first and foremost thing that we should talk about is the combat. Is Atreus's combat bad? Is it boring? Brain dead? Is it just shooting arrows and running away? Well, to answer those questions is very simple. No, dude. What the fuck are you talking about? You would need to be retarded to actually come up with something like that. Atreus's combat system is great. He works in a similar way to Kratos, where he has a skill tree with several different moves that you can cycle between and use in whatever order you want. So just like with Kratos, he has a lot of combos and cool mechanics that you can experiment with. The major difference between him and Kratos is that Kratos has better defensive and crowd control options, while Atreus is much faster and agile and has somewhat better ranged attacks. Another big difference is the damage they can take. On the Gimme God of War difficulty, Atreus gets one-shotted or two-shotted most of the time, while Kratos can take at least 3 hits before kicking the bucket. And that's pretty much all there is to say about Atreus's sections. They are fun, they push the story forward as intended, and they are a nice change of pace from Kratos' perspective. But despite that, they feel off. So why is that? Where do they go wrong? Well, in my opinion, the main problem with Atreus's sections is that there simply are not enough of them, and everything that we get in them is so bare bones and simplistic compared to Kratos' sections. Like in this game, we spent 80% of the time playing as Kratos and 20% as Atreus. The longest section with Kratos, the Dragon Valley, is around 7 to 8 hours long, and the longest section with Atreus, that is either the Ironwood section or the Muspelheim section, is like 1 hour and a half or 2 hours long at best. You see the disparity in playtime for both characters here? In a game like this, where you are given 2 main characters and you get to play as both of these characters, the playtime has to be even for both of them. That's just how it must be. And the same amount of effort and thought needs to go into making each character's gameplay, or otherwise one of the characters is going to end up feeling unsatisfactory to play. And that's exactly what happens in Ragnarok. Now let's see how the options and customization for both characters compare to each other. Kratos has 3 weapons, and a whole brand new shield system that allows him to customize his defensive options in many different ways depending on what build you decide to go for. Atreus only has 1 weapon and no customizable shield whatsoever. Kratos has 28 runic spells. Atreus only has 8. Kratos has 3 different Spartan Rage modes that you can customize according to your playstyle and the situation you are in. Atreus only has 1. Kratos has like 30 different armors that provide him with many different perks and stat boosts that allow for many different playstyles. Atreus only has like 5 armors and none of them offer any perks. They are just cosmetics. Kratos has the Amulet of Yggdrasil that allows him to equip himself with 9 out of like 80 different enchantments that further customize his builds. Atreus has like 10 accessories that only enhance his arrow properties, and he can only equip 3 of them at once. Kratos has customizable companions. Atreus doesn't have customizable companions. Man, the difference in customization and options that one character is given over the other is just mind-blowing to say the least. When you notice all these disparities in what a character is given over the other, which is not hard by the way, you can't help but feel like Atreus is just an afterthought in this game. It's like Santa Monica Studios is so afraid of actually introducing this new playable character to the franchise that they ended up not wanting to go with it altogether, but they were halfway through making Atreus's sections, so they just threw them in anyways for the YOLO element. And that's just such a stupid decision, man. Atreus's gameplay is great. They had a pretty neat thing going on in there with the boy, but then they blew it by not having faith in what they make and releasing a half-assed version of what could have been a great new playable character for the franchise. Which, funny enough, is still good, but it leaves so much to be desired. Some parts in Atreus's levels also feel lazy and like wasted potential. A good example of this is the Asgard wall section. For this part, they could have implemented some kind of climbing puzzle, something like a maze where you can climb towards several directions that lead you to several dead ends, and you have to explore all of them and find the correct path to continue forward. But nope, there's nothing like that in here. You just have to keep climbing straight on a designated path that the game has arranged for you from the beginning for like 10 minutes, and that's it. If this idea doesn't sound appealing, then just make this section into a cave-like level that you have to fight your way through. It would even make sense from a lore standpoint. Atreus has to climb the Asgard wall, but it turns out that the Asgard wall has become a nest for all manner of creatures throughout the centuries after its creation, so this this will prove to be quite the challenge for our young hero. And then you have to go in there and fight a lot of Grimms, maybe a few ogres, some seals, nightmares, perhaps even a troll, more of those wisps dudes. Make it something challenging and entertaining to go through. But the way they actually made it is just climb on a straight line for 5 minutes, fight this wisp dude, break these 2 pillars, climb another 5 minutes, and that's it. That's the Asgard wall section. And it feels like such a wasted opportunity because this location looks so cool and it's fucking huge. They could have made something so nice out of this, but it really feels like they got lazy here. Another instance where the Atreus'S sections feel lazy is the Niflheim section. People often claim that the worst Atreus's section is the Ironwood level, but I disagree with that. Aside from a really awful part where you do nothing but riding a cow and picking up fruits from the ground for 10 minutes, I think the Ironwood level is fairly decent. There are plenty of interesting combat encounters and mini-bosses, and even a boss fight that makes that section entertaining. The Niflheim section, on the other hand, feels weird, and it's kinda difficult to say why. Well, not really. The main problem with that level is Thor, I don't wanna carry you but I will, God of Thunder.
Hey, why can't we just fly over these guys straight to the mat?
Think I want to carry you all that way?
In this section we have Thor as our companion, and I don't know what's the matter with his AI in this level, but he just outright starts killing everything in your stead. There is even an ancient mini-boss, and if you keep your distance and leave Thor to his own devices, he will eventually kill the ancient too. In this level you have to go through a bunch of rooms with combat encounters in them, but every combat encounter is composed of 3 or 4 Hail Walkers and some nightmares. And that's it. The amount of enemies doesn't justify having such an overpowered companion as Thor in this section, and it just doesn't feel right. I repeated this level around 3 times trying to figure out what exactly felt out of place, and in any of those 3 times I didn't feel like the level was disastrously bad, but it just didn't feel fun either. Alright, so putting the boy aside, another controversial topic surrounding this game that I would like to talk about is the camera. You have some people complaining that the camera is annoying and that there needs to be an option to increase the FOV, and others argue that the camera should go back to being in fixated panoramic positions like in the old God of War games. And all I can say about that is just no, dude. Just no. Forget about that. The camera of the old God of War games was awful. The camera of the modern ones is just a massive improvement over seeing Kratos the size of an ant hitting a giant monster, or stuff getting in front of your view and preventing you from seeing a fucking thing. Never let God of War go back to that, please. And as for the increase on FOV, I disagree with that too, because that would make the game look weird. The camera being the way it is in this game has a special purpose. It makes the game feel much more immersive, and increasing the FOV would ruin that immersion. And the camera is not really what it gets in the way of the combat to begin with. The real culprit here is the lock-on feature. In this game, the lock-on feature doesn't really help you keep track of the enemies, it just slows down your camera rotation towards incoming attacks. I would recommend everyone who is having a hard time managing the camera in this game to up the rotation speed of it in the config menu and play without locking enemies on. You kinda have to get used to high rotation speeds, but you're gonna see that it is a lot more comfortable fighting like this than fighting with the lock-on feature. Okay, I think it's time we talk about another of the big selling points of the game, the story. There has been some talk about the story of Ragnarok not being as good as the one from the previous game, or that Ragnarok fails to meet the expectations set by God of War 2018, and that it also feels rushed. Well, what I can say about these criticisms is that they are true. Not entirely true, but true to a certain degree. Let's begin by addressing the point about the story not being as good as the one in 2018. In order to answer the question of which game had a better story, I would say it's necessary to keep in mind that 2018 was a very simplistic game when it came to story. It used a very simple concept, a father-son journey to fulfill a very personal goal. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that something simple cannot be good, because in fact, I love the story of God of War 2018. It's one of the few powerful enough narratives to make me shed a tear. If there is a piece of media that can prove that a simple narrative can be great when properly executed, it's that game. But I would like to put things into perspective for a moment. In God of War 2018, as major characters, we have Kratos, Boy, Mimir, Baldur, Freya, Brock, Sindri, Jormungandr, and Magni and Modi. Hell, I would even hesitate to consider Magni a major character, because that fucker only has like a total of 3 minutes of screen time before he gets his face bifurcated by Kratos and we barely get to know him. So not counting Magni for the aforementioned reasons, we have a grand total of 9 major characters in God of War 2018. Whereas in Ragnarok, we have Kratos, Boy, Mimir, Freya, Thor, Odin, Brock, Sindri, Rafe, Durlin, Freyr, the Elven Lovers, Birgir, Lunda, Hildisvini, Garm, Heimdall, Trud, Sif, Surtur, Sigrun, Jormungandr, Skildur, the Shield Maidens, and Gunnar. And I'm probably forgetting about some characters in here, but anyways, a grand total of at least 25 major characters in Ragnarok. While 2018 had only 9 major characters but managed to deliver greatness with those 9 characters, Ragnarok has 25 and it manages to also deliver greatness with no small portion of them. Granted, there are some characters like Odin and Thor that needed more screen time, or maybe even another game, to really shine, but they were still handled properly for the most part and had good and memorable moments in the story. Going just by the sheer amount of characters that it tries to work with, we can see that Ragnarok aims a lot higher than 2018. Ragnarok is just a much more ambitious game, and for that alone I have to give Ragnarok the W for the better narrative. It's just a game that tries to encompass a lot more and takes way more risks when it comes to story. We could argue that taking those risks doesn't really pay off, but in my opinion it does. And the intention to aim higher is there, and that's highly appreciated. And as for the story feeling rushed or not meeting the expectations set by the previous game, yeah, that is 100% true, man. We can see that especially in the characters of Odin and Thor. You just have to take a look at the lore of the God of War 2018 and you'll see that it sells you a very hardcore version of Odin and Thor. Like, these guys, according to the lore in that game, are complete savages. But in Ragnarok we don't really get to see any of that. Maybe at the very end of the game we get to see a glimpse of Odin's true potential for malice, but otherwise there is some stuff that definitely doesn't add up to what we were told in 2018. And you can't play the Ragnarok level in Asgard at the end of the game and tell me that that shit isn't rushed. Now, don't get me wrong, I love the Ragnarok finale. I would say it's the second most entertaining level in the game after the Dragon Valley, but I recorded the entire thing from the moment you set foot in Asgard until you defeat Odin, and it baffles me to say that the whole Ragnarok event literally happens in 1 hour. You mean to tell me that Asgard, the realm that rules over all the other realms, that is in complete control of Svartalfheim while simultaneously waging a war against Vanaheim and Jotunheim and having them both on the verge of defeat, suddenly falls in 1 hour? Like, come on, dude. That's just... There are no words to describe how ridiculous that is. Like, the level is really fun to play, but from a story and lore perspective, it doesn't make any sense. It needed to take way longer than just 1 hour. Now, these are not the only flaws that the story has in my opinion, but talking more in detail about the story would take quite a bit of time because of the length of the game and would drag this video on for way too long. So I would rather leave a more detailed analysis of the story for a separate video. One more point of controversy that I would like to bring up would be the puzzles, and in all honesty folks, it baffles me that this is even a point of controversy in the first place. I really don't think talking about this for too long is worth it at all, so I'm gonna try to be as brief as I can about this. You have people complaining that the NPCs or your companion characters spoil the puzzle solving in this game by giving away what you have to do, and I find this to be such a ridiculous thing to complain about, dude. Like, why are these people complaining and giving so much importance to some fucking puzzles in the first place? You are not playing a God of War game to solve puzzles, you're playing it for the combat, the boss fights and the story. So right off the bat, this is such a damn thing to complain about, and these complaints are also bullshit in my opinion, because that for sure was not my experience with the puzzles the first time I played this game. There were several instances where I was stuck for more than 20 minutes trying to solve a puzzle, and that frankly sucked so much ass, dude. If anything, I would say it needs more hints so you don't get stuck for that long during puzzle solving sections. A lot of the hints from the NPCs are vague, or they just point out something obvious that you should be able to notice in 5 seconds, and for more complex puzzles, there are no hints at all. And speaking about being stuck in a freaking puzzle, that's another thing that I want to point out. What's the point of being stuck in a puzzle for half an hour? What's so funny about that? Why are these people complaining that they aren't getting stuck for half an hour trying to get past this stuff every time? Like, this whole topic is just so bizarre to me, dude. I swear to God, people are so whiny nowadays. Alright everyone, it's about time we talk about the best feature that the modern God of Wars have to offer, and that is the new game plus, of course. Much like in God of War 2018, Ragnarok gives you the option to start a new playthrough with everything you had unlocked from a previous finished playthrough. So that means you get to play again from the beginning with a third new weapon that you unlock halfway through the campaign, all the runic spells and skills that you acquired, and all the equipment and resources that you crafted and collected throughout the previous journey. Not only that, but also the strength from all the enemies at the beginning gets scaled to a point where they match the strength of enemies at the end game of the first playthrough, and later on they become much stronger, so you have to keep upgrading your arsenal in order to stand a chance in combat. Speaking about arsenal, the new game plus feature also adds a new tier of equipment called Perfect Arsenal that you can get on any weapon or armor by utilizing scab slag and other new unique materials to further upgrade them at the blacksmiths. On New Game Plus, not only enemies become stronger by doing more damage and getting a larger health pool, mini-bosses and main bosses get new attack patterns and improved abilities that make them way more dangerous than before. And if this wasn't enough addition to the challenge, the developers also added a whole new difficulty level for the New Game Plus and also a level 1 challenge armor set. So let's talk about this new difficulty level for a moment. It's called 9 Burdens, and to sum it up, it's a set of enchantments that you can buy at the blacksmiths and equip on your amulet of Yggdrasil. And what they do is that they apply some crazy debuffs on Kratos. And only on Kratos. Of course you can apply them to Atreus because we have already established how barebones Atreus's sections are. And these debuffs make the game way much more difficult. We could say that they work in a similar way to the skulls in Halo. A lot of you probably remember playing Halo 2 on the hardest difficulty and getting to very specific secret spots in each level where you could grab a skull that made the screen go blank for a moment. Only for seconds later notice that you can't see the UI nor the arm of your character anymore. That sort of stuff is what we have here now in God of War Ragnarok. Let's actually take a quick look at what the full set of burdens burden enchantments due to the game. So first we have the Burden of Stun and Burden of Runic. These two decrease the stun damage in general and the damage of your runic attacks. The game doesn't specify how much in a percentage value, but after doing some testing I would say it's around a 50 to 60%, a very significant decrease. Then we have the Burden of Momentum. This one decreases your melee damage unless your weapon gauge is fully charged and the weapon gauge takes longer to charge up. Again, the game does not specify how much melee damage you lose with this, but doing some testing I've seen that it is like a 50 to 60% too. It's very noticeable. And the weapon gauge takes like around 3 times longer to charge up. So most of the time you are not gonna be able to fill up the weapon gauge because it takes forever to do so and you lose all of the charge if you get hit once. And also the weapon gauge charge goes away if you don't hit opponents in a brief period of time. And I've noticed that with this burden equipped, the time it takes for the charge to go away if you don't hit enemies is much shorter too. This one is kinda conflicting for me because less damage means that the combat is gonna be longer and more demanding, which is something that challenge enthusiasts like myself can appreciate, but at the same time, it takes away your ability to use the Blessing of the Frost and Gift of Apollo weapon buffs, which are two very cool skills, and it's kind of a shame that if you want a more challenge, you have to part ways with these two skills. I think it would be better if this thing simply reduced your melee weapon damage by like at 70% or whatever eternally without affecting your weapon gauge, so you could go crazy with all of your weapon buffs. Then there is the Burden of Elements, which decreases your resistance to status effects and your ability to proc status effects on enemies. So with this one, the first part about the reduction on your resistances seems irrelevant to me, because in this game, every time that you are hit with an elemental attack, you get afflicted by the element of that attack right away. So it doesn't matter if your resistances are reduced, because your resistances were always pretty fucking low to begin with. And as for the rate at which you proc status elements, that one is pretty significant actually. It makes it so that you have to use sigil arrows, or otherwise it becomes very difficult to proc a status effect on an enemy. Next we have the Burden of Restoration, which decreases the healing from Hailstones, Rage and Gear. This one is a pretty big deal too. In Ragnarok the Hailstones heal a lot more than in 2018, and with this burden on, you pretty much go back to that stingy amount of health replenishment that you had in the previous God of War, and any other form of healing is also drastically reduced. Did I mention that this thing also disables the usage of Resurrection Stones? So forget about buying a Berserker Resurrection Stone to spam rage after you get killed once in order to do extra damage to bosses. That's not a thing anymore. The next one is Burden of Weaponry, that reduces the damage and stagger capability of all weapon signature moves. The damage reduction in this one doesn't seem that noticeable in my opinion. It's probably around a 10 to 15%, because on top of having the Burden of Momentum that applies a significant damage reduction to your melee attack, your weapon signature moves are still the attacks that deal them more damage out of your whole moveset. On the other hand, the stagger capability reduction is pretty noticeable. Sometimes you'll hit light green or dark green health bar enemies with a signature move and it won't even make them falter for a moment. Then we have the Burden of Rage, which decreases your rage generation during combat. In God of War Ragnarok, the rage meter fills a lot faster than in 2018 too, and this burden basically makes it so it goes back to the speed at which you gained rage in 2018. That took like a half a fucking hour of constantly hitting enemies to fully charge. Then we have the Burden of Guard. This one makes it so you take like a 50% of the damage when you miss a parry and get guard crushed, and you also lose rage when this happens, but it's a very minor amount, so it's nothing to be worried about. And finally we have the Burden of Evasion. This one is a little over the top in my opinion. Basically, whenever you roll you get frozen, pretty much making rolling unviable, because whenever you get frozen you lose 50% of your overall speed, so you can't attack nor dodge in time anymore, and you pretty much get obliterated unless you use rage to get rid of the frozen status right away. I think this debuff takes things a little too far. You need to roll in this game. There are many enemies with AoE unblockable attacks that are very fast and tricky to dash away from at the last second, and rolling helps mitigating the possibilities of of getting hit by those attacks by a long shot, and in general, not being able to roll just makes things way too complicated and frustrating. I don't know, dude, I don't agree with this one at all. I think they could have gone with any other thing but this. And on top of all this, enchantments on your Yggdrasil amulet are pretty much disabled because you need to allocate all those enchantments sockets to the bardens, and it makes it so you can't really abuse any broken combination of enchantments that might allow you to cheese the game with insane amounts of damage and the likes, which I think it's a positive thing too. And yeah, that's basically the new difficulty level for the New Game Plus. Aside from the burdens of evasion and momentum, I think it's a great addition to the game, especially for those who can't find the game a little too easy on New Game Plus. Give me God of War difficulty like myself. Now, as for the level 1 armor set challenge, what this does in a nutshell is that it lowers your level to a point where all the enemies you fight beyond probably the second level of the game are going to be at a much higher level than you. They are gonna have red health bars and unblockable attacks, and they are gonna be all killing you in one hit. I haven't quite tried this one myself in Ragnarok so far, mostly because of fear of it being remotely similar to the experience I had with the same challenge in God of War 2018. Yeah, I did the New Game Plus level 1 challenge in 2018 and I actually beat it, but oh boy, that shit was god awful, dude. That has to be the worst gaming experience I've ever had in my entire life. I regret every fucking minute of my life that I spent doing that challenge. It seriously was that bad. But God of War Ragnarok is much better balanced and you have a lot more options, so who knows, maybe the level 1 challenge isn't that bad in this game. I'll be trying that one out on stream soon. And that's pretty much all I have to say about the New Game Plus in God of War Ragnarok. It's just an amazing feature, one of the best New Game Plus experiences that I've ever had in any game, and it has an insane amount of replay value. Alright folks, I kinda jumped the gun earlier by saying that we would go back to talk more about the other new mechanics in the game because I really can't find a good opportunity to actually go and do that now. So I apologize for that. Let me just explain the other mechanics briefly so we can wrap this video up. So we have the new blue enemy attacks that are basically unblockable attacks that you can counter. In God of War 2018 you had the yellow attacks that were moves that would guard crash you if you didn't parry them. But normally you wouldn't take any damage if you missed the parry, and you would get an opportunity to activate rage and avoid incoming damage while you were in the guard crashed animation. Then there were the red attacks, that were attacks that you had to avoid by either dodging or sprinting because these can't be blocked nor parried and you take damage right away if you come into contact with them, with no opportunity of activating rage to avoid losing health. And now in Ragnarok, besides these two types of attacks, there is also a third type. The blue attacks that are unblockable like the red ones and are also very tricky to dodge because more often than not, these are area of effect attacks that have huge range or grabs with high tracking properties that catch you even if you try to dash or roll away from them. So what you have to do against these attacks is to stay close to your opponent and double tap the block button whenever you see the blue ring indicator to start a guard break maneuver. If you manage to land the guard break maneuver in time, this will stop the blue attack and stun the enemy, opening them up for a long combo and high damage. I think this is a very good mechanic because it incentivizes the player to engage in direct combat with the enemies instead of resorting to more passive and lame playstyles like running away and spamming runic spells or weapon throws. This is one way in which the game tries to push the player into the fan zone, and I can appreciate the intention. Alright, that does it for the blue attacks. Let's talk now about the skill tokens. In this game, after spending some experience to unlock a skill for any of your weapons, you can then spend more experience to enhance that skill, and on New Game Plus you even get an additional chance to further improve said skill. And depending on the skill in question, you'll get to choose from 5 options: damage, stun, momentum, element or protection. Damage and stun respectively increase the amount of damage and stun that your skills inflict upon enemies. Element increases the rate at which you inflict the elemental effects of your weapons on enemies. Momentum increases the speed at which your weapon gauge charges up when attacking enemies, and protection increases Kratos' super armor, making it so he doesn't get staggered triggered by enemy attacks when he's attacking himself. This is actually a replacement for the stat system that was tied to skills in the previous game. In God of War 2018, every skill had a stat requirement that would enhance that skill if you met all the requirements, like for example having 300 or more vitality for some moves on the axe tree, or 250 runic for some skills on the blades tree. I think this new system is much better because it provides more options for the player to customize their skills in whichever way they want. The requirements in the system that was present in 2018 were often too high and would only allow you to get the enhancements for the skills in one weapon. In Ragnarok you can get the enhancements for all your skills at the same time as long as you have enough experience to invest on them. The bonuses that you can get on your skills with the skill token system are almost all pretty useful, with elements being the best in my opinion. Having the ability to burn or freeze your opponents more quickly so you can get that extra damage from vaporized frost and extinguished flames is something that I just would never give away in exchange for any of the other bonuses. Now I say that almost all of these bonuses are useful because there is one bonus in particular amongst these 5 that I find to be completely worthless, and that is protection. Whenever I play one of these action/RPG games, I always go for the highest amount of defense and health available because I'm a firm believer of the saying, the longer the better, and it's not any different for God of War. I mean, just take a look at that health bar. It's pretty long. Oh. So yeah, I have played God of War Ragnarok with a max vitality build, and vitality in these games is supposed to also increase the super armor properties of Kratos. But even after maxing out the vitality meter and setting all of my skills to the protection token, I still find my attacks being interrupted by a lot of enemies. So I don't know, I don't find protection to be that useful in all honesty. It's nothing compared to the amounts of super armor that you could pull off in God of War 2018 with a vitality build. And that's something that I'm also gonna be talking about more in detail later. But for real this time, I promise. Alright, so next we have the shield system, which basically allows you to equip several different shields now. Every shield has a particular stat boost that you can equip according to the kind of build you want to go for. And also, each shield provides you with a different defensive benefit, like for example the Shatterstar shield that allows you to jog while blocking, or the Guardian shield that allows you to counter enemies after parrying, or the Stone Wall shield that allows you to ignore guard crushing attacks and block them normally without having to parry as long as its meter isn't fully charged. This one being my favorite, by the way. In general, another fine addition to the game that adds more depth and customization. Good stuff. Okay, now it's time for talking about the rage modes. We have a Fury, which is the standard rage mode that you start the game with, and the same that we had in God of War 2018, except that this time around it has been considerably nerfed. In God of War 2018 you could spam the Fury activation iframes and shockwave to get out of any hairy situation for free. If you try to do the same in Ragnarok, you can avoid taking damage, but you'll get hit and lose a good chunk of your rage bar upon activation. And you are probably not gonna be able to activate Fury for a while after taking that hit. Besides that, Fury works pretty much the same as it did in 2018, with the only difference being the L1 Super Stomp move is now a grab that allows you to carry and throw light enemies off cliffs. Not gonna lie, I think the nerf that Fury received is a big yikes, but I also feel that it is necessary / understandable because those iframes were a little too abusable and allowed you to get away with many mistakes that otherwise wouldn't go unpunished and would require you to be more careful and play it better in general. The second rage mode that we unlock is Valor, which basically turns your rage meter into a parry that regenerates your health and grants you a melee damage boost. I don't really have much to say about this one, I think it sucks ass. The parry window that it gives you to repel enemy attacks is way too strict. It feels like you have to activate it on the very last frame before any attack lands, not to mention that having to parry by using the rage activation input feels extremely awkward, and this thing doesn't have any activation shockwave that interrupts whatever action enemies around you might currently be performing. So even if you get the parry timing correctly for the nearest incoming attack, other enemies can just follow up with their own attacks and take away whatever health you recovered from the parry, while you are locked in the animation of this rage mode. And don't even get me started with grab attacks. This thing doesn't even work half the time against grabs. Man, I really struggle to find any redeeming qualities in this thing. It definitely is the worst out of the three, and by a long shot. It could use a buff or two in the future for sure. And for the third rage mode, we have Wrath, which turns your rage meter into a grab or a special heavy attack that deals massive damage to regular enemies and bosses. To put it simple, this thing is busted, dude. The complete opposite of Valor. It's definitely the best out of the three rage modes, far and away. This thing just pumps out the damage to such an absurd degree that it can easily one-shot regular red health bar enemies. Yes, you heard that right. Red health bars. Enemies that are 3 or more levels above you and that otherwise have insane damage reduction against your attacks get one-shotted by this rage mode. This is possible because Wrath gets an insane damage boost if you use it on an enemy that has an elemental weakness to the weapon you are using. For example, Draggers are fire enemies. If you use Wrath on them while wielding the axe, you get that massive damage boost and they get obliterated in one hit. The same applies for Hellwalkers. These are ice enemies. If you hit them with Wrath while using the blades, you also get the damage boosts and they get destroyed, and so on and so forth. Now, Wrath doesn't have lots of iframes during activation like Fury does, but it does have a shockwave that interrupts the actions of any enemies near you, and it gives you a considerable amount of damage reduction and immortality if you get hit by projectiles or other attacks while activating it, and you also get to use it up to 4 times in a row if you have your rage meter fully upgraded, and at least 6 times if you're using a high vitality build, which in my opinion is far better than the iframes and activation that Fury has. All in all, Wrath is great, maybe a little too great. I genuinely believe that it is overpowered and it kinda needs to get nerfed, or the other 2 rage modes need to be buffed to the point where they can compete with Wrath. But as things stand now, Wrath is just too good and there is not really any reason to choose any of the other 2 rage modes over it. Okay, so next we have the 2 new arrow types, Sonic and Sigil. Sonic arrows are pretty much a mix of the 2 types that we had in God of War 2018, the light and thunder arrows. In 2018, the light arrows had the ability of stunning enemies very quickly and they detonated on impact, creating an explosion that would damage and stun other enemies nearby. And the thunder arrows had the ability of paralyzing enemies in place for a period of time. So in Ragnarok, the Sonic arrows are capable of stunning enemies quickly, they detonate on impact, creating an explosion that damages and stuns nearby enemies. They inflict enemies with a Sonic status that causes more explosions that stun other nearby enemies when hitting them with melee attacks. And if you send enemies afflicted with Sonic into the air, they will remain airborne and unable to move for as long as the Sonic status lasts on them. These arrows are a pretty cool new feature, but in my opinion the Sigil arrows is where the true fun is at in Ragnarok. These arrows inflict enemies with the Hex status, and any enemy that is inflicted with this status becomes considerably more susceptible to elemental attacks, making it a lot easier to burn or freeze enemies with your weapons, and anytime that you freeze or burn an enemy inflicted with Hex, an elemental explosion that can freeze or burn other enemies nearby occurs. So when you play with these arrows, it feels like you're watching a fireworks display. There are blue and red explosions constantly happening on screen, and it's just so fun to see how everything explodes and becomes covered in ice or flames. Not to mention that it's an excellent way of taking advantage of the vaporize frost and extinguish flames skills in the blades and axe to deal extra damage to burning or frozen enemies. These things are just great, another really welcome addition to the game. Okay, so next we have the spear. The spear is basically an upgraded version of the bare bare-handed combat from God of War 2018. In Ragnarok you can also attack bare-handed, but you're gonna notice that several moves from the bare-handed skill tree from 2018 have been removed. And in general, using your fist to attack enemies isn't as effective as it used to be. But that's when the spear comes into play. The spear serves the same purpose that the fist served in 2018, which is dealing high amounts of stun damage to enemies, while also adding plenty of new benefits to the mix. The spear has arguably the best range attacks in the game. It has the ability of accumulating marks on enemies via melee and range attacks that explode when pressing the weapon signature button. Depending on how many marks you land on your opponent, these explosions can stagger heavy enemies for long periods of time, air juggle or knock down light enemies, and also deal high damage. This weapon also has the ability of absorbing elements and special effects from enemies by either hitting them with a charged heavy attack or by absorbing projectiles. The spear also has a more versatile moveset for combat than the fists in 2018, and it has what's arguably the best heavy combo finisher in the game as well. All in all, the spear is a really fun weapon to use and another great addition to the game, and in general it's just a more balanced weapon. The fist in 2018 had this move where if you waited for a brief moment after any attack, Kratos would switch his battle stance and then you could press the heavy attack button and he would launch into enemies with a shield slap, and this move had invincibility during the entire launch animation, and basically it was completely busted. You could pretty much beat the entire game by just spamming this thing non-stop. And so for these reasons I would venture to say that the spear is just a much better than the bare-handed combat from 2018. Now I almost forgot about something big: the Yggdrasil amulet and the enchantments. So the amulet of Yggdrasil is basically the 3 slots for enchantments that could be found at any piece of armor in God of War 2018, combined in one item. Well, in 2018 you could equip up to 12 enchantments because you could also put them on your talisman / relic, so yeah, kind of a little nerf there, but anyways. You get this amulet like 1/4 through the game after defeating a boss, and at that point you can only equip 3 enchantments at a time, if I'm not mistaken. But you can upgrade the amulet by finding jewels of Yggdrasil that are scattered all across the game, until you can equip 9 enchantments at a time. Something interesting about the enchantments in this game is that they are sorted by types. Each type is named after one of the 9 realms, so you get stuff like Fortitude of Vanaheim, Lack of Svartalfheim, Promiscuity of Asgard, and that kind of stuff. Okay, maybe not promiscuity, but you get the idea. Anyways, each type of enchantment focuses on enhancing a particular stat on your character, and if you equip 3 enchantments of the same type, you can unlock special bonuses. There are also more powerful enchantments that grant you special bonuses without having to equip 3 of the same type. Usually you get these ones from defeating bosses and mini-bosses, and on New Game Plus you can find even more powerful enchantments that require you to increase a particular stat to a certain value, usually a very high one. Like for example 600 strength in order to equip them. Alright, with that pretty much all the new stuff, or at least the most relevant one, is covered. However, there is a massive change in Ragnarok that I would like to talk about before going into the conclusion of this review, and that is of course the stats. In God of War 2018, defense was by far the best stat. Even on the hardest difficulty, all you had to do to comfortably beat the game was to pick the armor with the highest amount of defense and vitality whenever you visited the blacksmiths. The damage reduction that you got from wearing high defense armor was extremely helpful, and went a long way into keeping you alive throughout long combat encounters. In Ragnarok, defense is fucking useless. Even when using high defense armor, you always get killed in 2 or 3 hits by all enemies. The damage that enemies do in Ragnarok on the hardest difficulty is just mind-blowing. This is why I said at the beginning that Ragnarok is a lot harder than 2018 on the hardest difficulty, so unless you're using something very specific like the Stern Bjorn armor set that only increases defense by a ridiculous amount, increasing defense in Ragnarok feels pretty worthless. Strength, on the other hand, felt in my opinion like the less impactful stat in 2018. The melee damage bonus that you got from increasing your strength didn't feel very relevant. Whereas in Ragnarok it's the opposite. You can easily feel how your close combat damage doubles or triples up by equipping stuff with high amounts of strength. Runic feels like it has been slightly nerfed in Ragnarok. The increase on the damage of your runic attacks doesn't seem as noticeable as it was in 2018 when raising your runic stat. Luck remains largely the same in both games, with the only difference being that activating bonuses and buffs of your equipment that are dependent on luck is now easier thanks to the astonishing plus 90 luck that the Draupnir Spear provides when fully upgraded. Vitality is an interesting case because it has been nerfed and also buffed at the same time. Like I mentioned before, Vitality is supposed to give you super armor, giving you the ability of attacking enemies without being interrupted by their own attacks, but in Ragnarok, even when you max out the Vitality meter, you still get interrupted quite frequently by enemy attacks. It's nothing compared to the glorious amounts of super armor that you could pull off in God of War 2018, where you could trade blows with a fucking ogre and come up on top.
This is bullshit. This is fucking horseshit. Super armor. What a horrible fucking idea.
However, there is one bright side to Vitality in Ragnarok despite having lost a lot of its super armor potential. Vitality in Ragnarok increases both HP and your rage meter. You can equip 3 Jotunheim type enchantments on your Amulet of Yggdrasil and you'll receive a special bonus that allow you to increase your rage meter in proportion to how much Vitality you have. And I have to say that this is my favorite enchantment set bonus. It's really useful. With a good amount of Vitality you can almost double the amount of rage that you can carry at any time, which is great. So I'm glad to say that Vitality is not a complete lost cause despite losing a big part of what made it great in 2018. And as last but not least, there is cooldown, which has been significantly nerfed due to all runic attacks taking as much as 3 times longer to charge up in Ragnarok, and in all honesty, this nerf makes a lot of sense because in 2018 there were many runic attacks that would recharge ridiculously fast when you had high amounts of cooldown. We're talking about using runic attacks every 10 or 15 seconds here, which was quite abusable. So now recharge times for all runic attacks have been adjusted, so they have to be used more strategically and can't be abused like in 2018, which I find to be a very positive change, since God of War is supposed to be a game about close quarters combat and not a game of spamming magic shit from a distance. Alright folks, that's pretty much all I had to say about the game, so quickly now, no game is perfect, right? We are all always going to find something in a game that is gonna bother us, something that we're gonna hate and completely disagree with. So here's some stuff that I find obnoxious in God of War Ragnarok that I wish it were removed or fixed as soon as possible. The double tap input on the guard break maneuver. Since the days of God of War 2018, you could perform a guard break attack against enemies taking a defensive posture by double tapping the block button, and Jesus Christ dude, this shit sucked ass. On top of being useless most of the time because there are many other moves that can guard crushed enemies that are far more effective, you couldn't even disable this thing, and it was mandatory to unlock in order to get access to 2 other very useful skills in the bare-handed tree. But the worst part about this move is that it gets in the way of parrying so fucking much. In a game like this where pretty much everyone and their moms have a guard crashing attack and many of those guard crashing attacks are delayed, you need to reliably be able to let go of block and go back to blocking right away. But since there is a goddamn action embedded to double tapping the block button that causes your character to stop blocking and expose himself to incoming attacks, that is impossible. Man, if I got a dime every time that I got hit because I tried to parry an attack, but the attack had a delay on it, so I let go of block and try to parry it again only to have Kratos do his own guard break move instead of trying to block again, I would be fucking rich. It's just so frustrating and so infuriating that this action shares the same button as blocking. Seriously, what the fuck were the developers thinking when they assigned two completely different actions that serve completely different purposes to the same fucking button? It's obvious that one of the actions is going to be very liable to activating by accident instead of the other one, and this thing in Ragnarok is somehow even worse because you can disable it. It's now a core mechanic integrated into the basic controls of the game, and there are a lot more enemies with a lot more delayed guard crashing attacks. A very simple fix that the developers could add for this would be to add the option to change the guard break maneuver from a double tap input to a dual input. This is completely possible because they have already done this with Rage. You activate Rage by pressing both thumbsticks at the same time. So they could assign the guard break move to, I don't know, triangle plus circle or L2 plus R2. I think about anything would be much better than this double tap fuckery on the block button. The frost effect on the axe is counterproductive. Most of us know at this point the Leviathan axe has ice powers, and it can apply the frost status on enemies. And this is a problem because what the frost status does is that it slows down the overall speed of your opponents by a significant margin, like 50% or something, and in this game that's something that just doesn't work on your favor, especially against bosses and mini-bosses. Most of the time, high-profile enemies in this game have some kind of teleport or instantaneous long-range attack that you have to dodge or parry at the very last frame. These attacks usually have some kind of delay or tricky timing that you need to get used to in order to be able to deal with it effectively, and when you use the axe against these enemies, you are constantly inflicting them with the frost status, making those last second dodge or parry attacks have a different timing to them, and that basically messes up your reaction window, and you end up getting hit by those attacks regardless of them being slowed down. The slowdown effect of frost just isn't a suitable thing for this game. It's so annoying. Instead of helping you, it just messes you up and makes things more complicated. It feels counterproductive to such an extent that I just avoid using the axe against bosses altogether. It's just not a useful thing for the player. Walkie-talkies. Does anyone remember in God of War 2018 that segment after fighting the first ogre where you ran into the Black Breath and then Freya comes in saying that she knows a way to get past it? Well, I for sure remember it, and I also remember how fucking awful it was. It was nothing but walking and listening to the characters talk for what felt like 10 minutes straight. It was kinda annoying having to sit through that every time you replay the game, although other than that particular scene, I don't remember any other instances of the game becoming a total snorefest for 10 minutes like that. However, in Ragnarok, there are several instances similar to that Freya segment in God of War 2018, and Jesus dude, it gets old real quick. The most noticeable of these segments being the cow segment in the Ironwood mission with Atreus. Come on now, we all know how much ass that part sucked. But there are also other segments like this that drag on for way too long, like in the first time you go to Svartalfheim and get the Sonic arrows, or when you travel to Alfheim with Tyr and you spin a stupid wheel for 5 minutes straight. Now, God of War Ragnarok is a pretty long game. It can take up to 70 hours to finish when you played it for the first time on the hardest difficulty levels. And all the walkie-talkie segments combined sum up to 1 hour of those 70 at best, so when you look at the big scheme of things, it isn't that big of a deal, but I don't know dude, I still dislike them and I find them to be unnecessary. These segments are just cutscenes with extra steps. Just make them fully fledged cutscenes instead and let the player skip them, or just put some more combat encounters in between so they are easier to digest. And skip all the cutscenes. So when God of War Ragnarok released back in November last year, you couldn't skip cutscenes. And that sucked because cutscenes in this game can be pretty lengthy, and not being able to skip them can be a pretty big hassle for a lot of people that wants to replay the game. And in all honesty, it's just ludicrous that in 2023 there are still games coming out that don't allow you to skip freaking cutscenes. That literally makes no sense, dude. There is no reason at all that can justify a game not allowing the player to skip cutscenes. Furthermore, the only reason that I can think of as to why the developers decided to not let the players skip cutscenes on release is that they thought something around the lines of, Oh, our story is so good that people are gonna love it, and they are gonna want to rewatch the entire 7 to 8 hours of cutscenes that we put in this game. There is no way the players are gonna want to skip all of this. I seriously have a suspicion that's what they thought when they decided to go without a skip cutscene feature for this game on release, and all I can say about that mentality is fuck off, Santa Monica. What's wrong with you guys? That's so arrogant and pretentious. Stop wasting people's time. Anyways, with the addition of the New Game Plus feature for Ragnarok 6 months after release, they finally added an option to skip cutscenes, but it doesn't end there, because the skip cutscene option is a half-assed one. It turns out that in this game they did something very weird with the cutscenes, like there are full-blown cutscenes that you can skip, and the gameplay integrated cutscenes that you cannot skip. And this is just stupid and annoying because there are instances such as when you unravel the secrets of the giant shrines, or when Kratos dreams of his wife, where you get the option to skip a normal cutscene, only to skip a few minutes forward where you are then forced to watch 2 or 3 more minutes of a gameplay integrated cutscene that you can't skip because for some damn reason Santa Monica Studios considers standing still for 3 minutes listening to the characters talk as gameplay, and you have to eat it. And after that, the developers decided that you have been force-fed enough exposition, so they give you another prompt to skip another cutscene, and then you skip that next cutscene and you are finally able to continue playing the game. So all I can say about this is, what the fuck, Santa Monica? This idea of integrating cutscenes into gameplay is just absurd. Doesn't make any sense, it ruins the vibe for the players that want to replay the game for the gameplay, and it's overall just a bad game design. You guys can do better than this, come on dude, like seriously, this is just dumb. Bullshit bosses. There are a lot of bosses in God of War Ragnarok, and the majority of them are great, and I had a really good time fighting them, but from the top of my head I can remember 3 bosses that were not a good time at all. Those being the Trio Berserker, the Poison Berserker, and the Valkyrie Queen Guna. The Trio Berserker is a 3-on-1 boss fight where the 3 bosses take turns in attacking you. Or that's what it's supposed to be and what I would really like it to be, but in reality it's the opposite. It's an RNG clusterfuck where the 3 Berserkers pretty much just attack you at the same time. They are supposed to follow an attack pattern where the red berserker attacks you from up close with melee attacks and one of the blue ones assists red berserker with range attacks. But in this game, bosses have something that I call the aggression meter. It's an invisible meter that fills up when you hit a boss in quick succession, and when this meter gets full, bosses become much more aggressive and attack way more often. This is very noticeable in endgame bosses like Thor, the dragons or the berserkers, and it sucks when it happens with the Trio Berserker because they pretty much forget about their attack patterns and just attack you all at once, with unblockable moves. It's the fucking worst when in order to avoid filling up the aggression meter and getting steamrolled by the 3 berserkers at the same time, you have to play super passive and lame, which makes the fight drag on for way too long and it gets boring very quick. This boss fight in general just sucks and it really needs to be nerfed so you don't get barraged with a storm of unblockable attacks that you can't possibly dodge all at the same time. Poison Berserker is very similar to Trio Berserker in the sense that it's also an RNG clusterfuck. So this guy has the ability of summoning minions at the beginning of the fight and every time that you take down a 30% of his health or so. And his minions are pretty fucking spongy, so taking them out takes a lot of time and effort. The problem with this boss is that his minions are constantly chasing after you, stun locking you in place with their incessant attacks. All the while you have Poison Berserker constantly teleporting in front of your face using car crashing attacks or unblockable moves that you need to move away from. But how do you move away when you have 4 fuckers relentlessly chasing after you and keeping you locked in place with their attacks? I don't know dude, I guess you just get hit, die and try again and pray to the Norse gods that you are allowed to fight back in your next attempt. It feels like that's the answer most of the time when you die to this boss, it's just stupid. Gunna is a boss that pisses the hell off of me because she's a freaking blender. She has this move where she spins and throws 2 daggers at you. This move not only does a lot of damage, like a good 60 to 70% of your health bar on the hardest difficulty, but it's also unblockable, and to top it off, it's unreactable too. I don't know if I have this problem because I'm playing this game on PS4 where it runs at 30 FPS. I don't think that's the issue, to be honest. I still should be able to see it coming and dodge it, but this fucking dagger throw move is so cancer, dude. It just comes out too quick and there is not enough feedback from the animation of the attack for the player to see it coming. There is just no way to avoid it if you're close to her unless you're preemptively rolling all the time. But if you do that, you lose a lot of opportunities to actually do damage to her. Okay, so maybe I need to chill with the aggression and play more passively so she doesn't get me with her unblockable and reactable bullshit dagger throw? I'm gonna stay away from her and let her come to me instead.
Get out of there!
Well, fuck! That doesn't work either, because if you stay away from her, she uses this blue AoE attack that covers more than half of the arena and doesn't give you any time to actually run to her and interrupt her. If I stay close to her, she hits me with her unreactable and blockable dagger throw. And if I stay away from her, she uses the blue attack and I don't get enough time to stop her. This boss is so obnoxious, dude. These 2 moves that she does really need to be nerfed in my opinion. They make 0 sense and are not fun to deal with at all. And the funniest thing is that those attacks are not even the worst part about Gunna. When you fight her on New Game Plus, she can input read your runic spells and rage attacks. Look, I don't wanna sound like a little baby like that synthetic man, dude.
That's exactly what's happening. Look, the input reading. Input reading proved right there. Input reading.
But she does input read you for real, and it doesn't make sense most of the time because she will randomly react to your runics and rage mid-animation with a Valhalla stomp. Well, she doesn't say Valhalla like the Valkyries from 2018. But she does the same move and yeah, you can't even use runic attacks against her. She really sucks so much ass. She's the worst boss in the entire game in my opinion.
Unworthy! The All-Father is avenged!
No Berserker dedicated boss team. The Berserkers in God of War Ragnarok are a big deal. They are a series of secret bosses scattered throughout the 9 realms that also happen to be the most difficult bosses in the game, and by a long shot. Just like the Valkyries in God of War 2018, fighting these guys in general was quite epic. The fights were really fun and memorable except for the trio and the poison dude that I talked about earlier, but I feel like the fights could have been a lot better had the developers decided to compose a dedicated boss team for them. I mean, the Valkyries in 2018 had their own dedicated boss team, so why not give the same treatment to the Berserkers? It kinda ruins the vibe that for these high-profile boss fights, they decided to just copy-paste a regular combat team for random mobs from 2018.
Felt that one, brother.
You are nothing! Not worth my time!
Not gonna lie, that feels pretty fucking lazy, Santa Monica. Music is such an important factor for this type of games, and the fact that they disregarded this element so hard on what are some of the most important boss fights in the game is just insane for me. Bugs. There is a skill in the axe called Return in Whirlwind, where Kratos recalls the axe after an axe throw and does a spinning attack. This is one of my favorite skills on the axe, but unfortunately in Ragnarok it's bugged. And sometimes when you perform this skill, Kratos does this instead. That needs fixing for sure. There is a bug with the spear and the guardian shield that makes you unable to attack with the spear for like half a second after a counter with the guardian shield. Whenever you counter with the guardian shield and you are wielding any other weapon, you can attack right away after the counter, but not with the spear. This is especially bad against bosses and mini-bosses because that half a second delay on your attacks quite often means losing the opportunity to land a follow-up combo on the enemy, making the spear and the guardian shield an unviable choice. The iframes on the dash feel inconsistent. Some bosses and mini-bosses have shockwave attacks that you can dash away from at the last second in order to deliver the boss a more hefty punish, but sometimes even though you dash away at the last second you still get hit, and other times you can dash away very early and not get hit. This doesn't really make sense. I don't know if it's an issue of the terrain where you fight certain enemies or if it is an actual issue with the dash itself, but there is a problem there that makes it feel very inconsistent. And that kinda sucks because you randomly get hit and you can't afford to take damage randomly on the harder difficulties. There were some other bugs that have already been fixed with the latest update. There might currently be other ones, but from the top of my head, those are the most significant ones that I remember of at the moment. Alright, I think I ranted enough. Let me recap the things that made me fall in love with this game real quick. Combat. The combat in this game is just amazing. There's lots of depth to it and the wide range of customization that it offers only makes it all the better. Music. The music in Ragnarok is great, even though I think there is room for improvement in some parts of it, like the Berserker fights. The soundtracks complement the level design, the combat and the overall vibe of the game pretty well. Level design. The level design is simply beautiful to look at, and it's very entertaining to explore and discover everything that there is hidden in it. Enemies and bosses. The amount of different enemies and bosses that you fight in this game is astonishing, and all of them are fun to fight, save for some very few exceptions. Characters and story. Most of the characters in this game were also great, their performance was top-notch, the voice acting was on point, and the story overall was good enough for God of War standards. The challenge. God of War Ragnarok is a really tough game, one of the toughest games I've ever played. I'm so glad to see that even in this day and age where you have all these wannabe video game experts complaining day and night about games being too hard, there are still developers like Santa Monica Studios pushing the limits of the challenge aspect of their games forward and not giving in to the demands of people that honestly just need to get good. My all-time favorite parts about this game. Best male character, Brock. Best companion character, Brock. Most based character, Brock. Best female character, Brock. Hottest character, Brock. Funniest character, Brock. Best waifu, Brock. I mean, Sif. Best reason to replay the game, Brock. Best level of the game, any level that has Brock. And the Dragon Valley. Best boss of the game, Raised and Mist. Honorable mention to King Rolf. Best song of the game, the Dragon's Theme. Best runic attack, the Mountain Splitter. Best weapon in the game, Mimir. Conclusion. God of War Ragnarok is a great game. 9 out of 10. Is it a masterpiece? Who cares about that? It's a good game and you should play it. Like and subscribe and all the YouTube crap to stay on touch with my latest uploads. Peace!